Welcome back viewers, ladies, gentlemen, non-binaries and anyone with ears or other sound detection organs. Hope you enjoy. We are continuing with Going Native, written by Uncle Sealing. Going Native, Chapter 76. Ellara's fingers entwined tightly with Iing's as they watched the little blue car speed down the road and away from the hotel. The bright paint shone in the early morning light as the vehicle got smaller and smaller until finally it was obscured by a nearby hill. I can't believe he took the dog with him. While she was a bit put out that Stace felt the need to go it alone for his trip, she could at least understand it. Seeing the convertible's top down with Potato snugly strapped into the passenger seat had been funny enough that it had neatly cut through any lingering uncomfortableness. Her cute human boyfriend was taking his tiny dog and tiny car out to meet with an old friend. He wasn't going to do anything dangerous. I can't believe he bought the dog sunglasses. The pair stood comfortably. The air was cool but not uncomfortably so, and the human work crew was just starting to make their way out of the hotel, most lugging cups of coffee. Ellara still felt uncomfortable around humans, but this particular group didn't seem too bad and none of them had caused problems. Even the spy had been keeping his head down and not trying to cause trouble. A few muttered curses drew the Marine's attention and she swung her head just in time to see a half-dressed investigator Chelsea stumbling her way out of the hotel, still pulling on her long dark coat. "Where is he?" Chelsea sounded panicked, and Ellara and Iing just looked at one another in confusion. "I just got an alert that Stace badged out at the main gate." "Where's he going?" Ellara hoped she kept the humor out of her voice as she answered. "He's visiting his attorney for some legal stuff in Seattle. Should be back in 3 or 4 days. Of course he forgot to tell Chelsea." Ellara could appreciate that. Stace belonged to her and Iing, not the noble interloper. "And you just let him go?" Chelsea let out a few choice swears. "I'll have to talk to Commander Rem, maybe we can get one of the security drones to follow." "Who is providing security?" "Pomme de terre." Ellara watched Chelsea's mental gears turn, followed by recognition. "The dog." "Yep." Iing smiled. "She's a real terror when she needs to be." After a moment, his smile faded and he got more serious. "Seriously, though. He'll be fine. He managed 30 years on his own without us. He needs some time to himself and he can't get that here. Plus whatever mystery business he's taking care of with his attorney. It's not like he's going to be bar hopping or anything." Chelsea nodded, but her face was still twisted in a frown. "Still, though. Maybe I should grab Keller and follow him. Just to be sure." Ellara perked up at that. Keller was here? She had figured that Chelsea and Keller would have left after giving the presentation about Nix. Still, now she had a choice. She could let Chelsea hang herself by chasing after Stace, who would undoubtedly be upset, or she could do the right thing and help nurture the small bit of relationship that was growing between the pair. Ellara tried to keep her voice even and hide the little spike of resentment. "If you did follow him, Stace would probably hate you for it. Same if he noticed he was being followed by a drone and figured out who sent it. He wants to be alone for a couple days, and we should all respect that. Stace does have that armored coat you gave him and that crazy handgun of his, and he'll call us if he runs into trouble. You just need to trust him." "Well, shit. I suppose that's fair." Chelsea perked up as a thought popped into her head. "He'll be back in time for his birthday, right?" Questing for great truths weaved her way through the workers as they finalized the assembly of the VCA. Occasionally, she would place her right hand over her head, palm flat on a strut, and tap her metal-clad middle finger on the structure. The transducer in her hand would detect the vibrations and the visual overlay would show her the results of each ping. Officially, she was checking welds. Unofficially, she was searching for sabotage or possible listening devices. Of course, finding Spy Kit was a serious issue, but she still had to laugh at the idea of someone trying to sneak a camera or a microphone onto an orbital telescope. "Hey Quest." She turned her head at Samuel's voice to see him standing to one side, his VR goggles and haptic gloves on. "Watch this." A few humans swore as the 360 mirrors hanging over their heads shuddered to life, then swung to each stare at the gear child. She stepped to the side and they all turned to follow her. A pop-up in her visual field showed that Sam wanted to share a video link, and she accepted it with a thought. In a small window hanging in front of her, a distorted full panoramic view of Questing for Great Truth stood awkwardly. She could see everything, including an obvious grease smear on her butt. She swung a hand down to cover it and the video feed showed her motion in absurdly high definition. "Can you not?" Sam's grin was obvious under the headset as the cameras went back to a neutral position. He started walking towards her in a stumbling, drunken gait and Questing for Great Truths closed the distance herself, trying to minimize the chance of the little guy hurting himself. "Man, it's hard to walk in third person. You're still using the array." "Yeah, this headset doesn't have any outside-facing cameras. You could, take it off." "Where's the fun in that?" Sam slid the headset up to his forehead and peered at her with those startlingly blue eyes. "Find anything interesting?" "No, not yet. This team did fantastic work. I'm glad. I think most of them are going to be invited back for the next project if they are up for it. And we should have the entire array done by tomorrow." Samuel bounced up and down on his heels. "Which means a fancy flight for everybody. Did you want to come?" Questing for Great Truths shook her head. "Nah, I've spent plenty of time in zero-G and I've already seen Earth from orbit. Just make sure you take a Skell with you so he can hand out anti-nausea medication and bandage up bruises." "Good idea." Samuel took a moment to look down at the ground, scuffing at it with his shoe. Why was he suddenly so nervous? "So, any idea if your uncle is going to be able to make it out here? His last message said he was going to start heading towards Earth as soon as I got him the medical records for you and Stace. I sent those yesterday, so it will be a few days before he gets them and then a week or two to get here, assuming there isn't anything more pressing. He does get pretty busy." She lifted her right arm and put her hand on Sam's shoulder. She could feel his heart racing through her transducer. "Having second thoughts?" "Not really, kinda. Just nervous. I want to be able to do the cool shit you can do, but the thought of someone sticking wires in my brain still squicks me a bit." Samuel shrugged, his face darkening in a flush. "Like, I love the idea analytically but emotionally I'm freaking out. What about talking it over with Sammy? You really should discuss things like this with your spouse." Questing for Great Truths gave some gentle pressure to Samuel's shoulder and he obediently began to move along with her, away from the very cheap array and back towards the hotel. They are excited but also nervous. I think the idea of becoming a post-human cyborg appeals to both of us. It's more about the risk of surgery. Again, wires in my brain? You don't have to get wires in your brain, as you keep putting it. Plenty of people prefer to control their implants through other methods. Hand gestures and the like picked up through the peripheral nervous system. Yeah, but I don't like doing things by half. I want to be able to control my computers just by thinking about it. Some co-processors like you have so I can run calculations in my head. Interface with stuff like the VCA without a headset and gloves." Samuel grinned. "It's just a big decision, I know. Until I met you I didn't really know half of what cybernetics were possible. Oh, believe me, we haven't even scratched the surface. My uncle will give you the full dissertation when he gets here. His whole life is dedicated to helping people accept the concept, though you're farther along than most. Questing for Great Truths took a moment to run a hand through her hair, ensuring it was spiky and not covering the depilated side of her head. The bigger question is, where are you going to put your tattoo? What? Samuel gave her a perplexed look. She turned her head slightly so he could see the delicate gold tracery that covered half of her head. I don't. Is that a schematic? I never really stared at it. And is that real gold? It matches your freckles. It is a schematic, sort of. A diagram of all of the different modifications I have, so if I get hurt and need medical attention they'll know what to do. Less useful when I'm out here in primitive land, but among dear child it's very useful. You don't actually have to get one, and even if you did you could get it wherever. I wonder if I could add it to my back piece. The small, pale man slipped his hands around the hem of his shirt and, in a moment, he was topless. Questing for Great Truths felt her face flush red and tried to avert her eyes as he spun around and leaned forward slightly to arch his back. What do you think? She took a few moments for a deep breath, then looked. His skin, the white of parchment, was smooth and pulled tight across the muscles of his back. Down his spine was geometric tattoo, thin lines connecting circles and polygons in a symmetrical wedge that drew her attention down farther than was really necessary. Yeah. I'm sure we can come up with something. Come on, girl. Stop staring at his ass. She tried to move her eyes away, thinking instead of their conversation. She had to pull it out of memory and play back the last few seconds. You wanted to know about the gold. Samuel spun back around and grinned at her. He seemed to be in no hurry to put his shirt back on, standing in the spring chill and surrounded by people. She took another deep breath, then pointed at the fabric twisted in his hands. He pulled it on and Questing for Great Truths let out her breath in a long sigh. Once she was better composed, she continued. One of my ancestors was a radiation worker. She had gold radiation shielding embedded in her skin to help protect her systems, both biological and inorganic. After she passed, the gold was reclaimed and it has been passed down and spread among the family for a few generations now. My tattoo on my head and the freckles you mentioned are a memorial to my family's history. Plus they are really cute. Those pale blue eyes locked onto her and Sam's smile was, while not lecherous, not exactly chaste either. Questing for Great Truths focused, gulped a little, and finally decided she needed to take control of the situation. Sam? Seriously? Are you flirting with me, or just teasing? She waited for an answer and was surprised when the small man blushed. Both. Ella rolled her eyes and sighed. Once she was done staring, of course. She was back on the roof of the hotel and had a full view through her binoculars of Samuel flashing the dear child and half of the site personnel. From her vantage point, she could watch the ripples of his little indiscretion. Shilvati in military kit stopped what they were doing, paths seemed to move towards him more than necessary. It was amusing as well as horribly unprofessional. I can see what you meant about security at this place. Keller took a pull from her bottle and clanked it down on the rooftop. You can plan for everything, but then the owner's husband decides to go topless in the middle of the day and suddenly none of the girls can so much as walk in a straight line. As the head of security for the painter facility, Ella was, in theory, a perfectly acceptable person to be having a conversation with Keller Chelzer, wife of the co-owner of the whole enterprise. Still, it had taken a lot of her nerve to manage it. She was even more surprised that Keller had accepted a chance to come up on the roof and hang out for a while. Samuel is definitely problematic. It doesn't help that he nearly fucked Scout Captain Pellick into a coma while in range of our security cameras. A sharp cough sounded next to her and Ella turned to see that Keller had managed to spill about a third of the bottle of Blue Grail all over herself. He did what? When they were installing the security cameras, the two of them hiked out together. Then the cameras caught them making out, and Sam made absolutely no secret of what they were doing just outside of visual range. When they started the hike back, some of the security staff was placing bets on if she'd make it back without collapsing. She was limping so bad. The huge form of Keller shook as the woman laughed uproariously, and when she finally finished after a few long seconds, there were tears in her dark eyes. "Oh damn, that's great." "Yeah, after that pretty much every girl on base asked Sam out on a hike, but so far I think he's only gone out with members of the scout team. And they all came back walking like they just hiked 20 kilometers barefoot on sand." Keller broke into laughter again, and when she finally finished she spoke almost to herself. "I am not going to let any of those girls live that down. You know them." Ella had suspicions about the scouts, and Keller had just confirmed them. "They are your friends from the hospital, aren't they?" Keller frowned, but nodded. After a moment of thought and a pause to drain the rest of her bottle, she spoke. "I think Samuel figured them out somehow. He's definitely smart enough. He's probably using his hikes to feed my team intel without getting anybody suspicious. It makes sense, but honestly I think Samuel might just be kind of a slut." Ella smirked at the huge woman. "At least he's easy on the eyes, I suppose." Keller leaned closer to Ella, not quite touching, black eyes with gold irises catching the smaller Marine's attention. "Honestly, I prefer a strong woman to keep me company." As twilight fell, the sun slipping below the Rockies, Dr. Sammy Painter Forsyth took careful steps, trying to keep their balance while looking straight up. Above them, the 360 mirrors of the very cheap array were tucked into their protective housings, locking solenoids engaged. The workers were back in their rooms or in the recreation area or the pool, celebrating a job well done. Tomorrow, they would have their fun trip in zero-G on the good graces of Jelsai Chelza. Sammy wouldn't be there. No, Sammy had another job. They pulled out their pad and checked it again. The email address was a random mash of letters and numbers, but the subject line had managed to catch Sammy's attention. Subject: "Thanks for the ride." Sammy: "Thank you for everything." Attached to the email was a series of digital images, layouts and designs for logo, name, and registration decals for the Necessity. Everything they would need to decorate the space truck. All they would have to do is find a print shop that could handle the sizes involved. Maybe a vehicle wrapping service could manage. It was good to know that Chandler had made it out, that his family was safe. It was still heartbreaking. His family was going to have to give up their whole life and start again. Even though Sammy knew nothing would come of it, they made a point of setting a reminder in their head. They would have a talk with Jelsai. Maybe Chandler could work out some sort of deal. Of course, it would never work. Just look at what had happened to Jessica. Even if Chandler was a gentle soul, his organization wasn't that sort. They had no problem hurting people. Were they just focusing on Nix to ignore the problems here on Earth? Could Sammy, could their strange and growing family, really help anybody? Trying to get rid of Celia had only resulted in pain for everyone. What they were going to do now was such a huge risk. Could they really do it? Sammy smirked. Of course they could. The tiny physicist took a moment to give the Necessity a friendly pat before bouncing their way towards the hotel at a run. There was a party to get to, after all. End of chapter. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe, click the bell so you don't miss any episode and do all the other YouTube stuff, visit and support the author, and I'll see you next time. If you didn't enjoy, comment on what I can do better. And as usual, have a wonderful day.